Welcome to Health Affairs from A to Z. I'm Nancy Valentine, PhD and registered nurse. I am also working at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Nursing as a professor and associate dean for practice, policy, and partnerships. This show is brought to you by the College of Nursing, and we are having a sparkling guest today who I will be introducing in just a moment. But I want to remind you that this show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer, and you are invited to call in at the number on your screen and ask Julianne Rutherford, our guest today, any questions about this topic that you might want to ask an expert about. So our topic today is a bit unusual, and I hope you will find very provocative and interesting. The title is Womb to Womb, and we're going to be talking about the science of her work that is looking at reproductive health, basically having a baby, across the lifespan, and what this means for you, the health of your child, and for succeeding generations. So to that end, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Dr. Julianne Rutherford, who is an associate professor for women, children, and family health science at the College of Nursing at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And she is really working with students and with other scientists on midwifery and women's health. So she's really helping to train the next generation of nurse practitioners, and she's also advising PhD students in their research. She is not a nurse, but she's working very closely with many, many nurses. Her background is very interesting, and we're going to ask her about that. She is a biological anthropologist whose work is integrating all the evolution, like how we change over time, all those theories, and then the impact that that has on who we are as people, our biomedical, who we are inside and out science. So her central interest is the dynamic maternal environment sort of inside the womb and how the fetus develops. Now, I'm not going to say any more about that because Julianne is the expert here. So I want to welcome you to our, show, Julianne. And I'd like to start with, being a biological anthropologist, really applying that science to clinical work, primarily but not exclusively nursing. Tell us how you got involved with that. It'd be very interesting.
It was a long, winding road, but I started off in graduate school in anthropology with an interest in human evolution and fossils.
Fossils.
So
okay.
I started out being interested in paleoanthropology, which is the study of human fossils and the evolution of walking on two legs and that kind of thing. And some of the viewers might be familiar with Lucy, the very famous fossil Lucy. So I was really interested in that, and then part of my training for paleoanthropology, I started taking gross anatomy. So studying anatomy, the gross level, I took histology, which is the microscopic level, and I just became fascinated with anatomy. My graduate studies, I actually struggled quite a lot in graduate school trying to come up with a dissertation topic, and I did some field work with primates thinking, okay, maybe I'm interested in watching live primates, maybe not paleoanthropology. But when I was doing the field work, I was really fascinated by maternal-child behavioral interactions. Just that unit, that social unit, that kind of biological unit was just really fascinating to me. At the same time, I was doing my anatomy studies.
Okay, so was that because you took a trip to the zoo? I mean,
no,
how did that happen?
Yeah, so when I was a graduate student, I took a field primatology course in Nicaragua.
Oh, okay.
Where I spent several weeks in Nicaragua and in the forest watching howler monkeys and finding as many moms and babies in the forest as I could just to watch them as much as I possibly could. And it was fascinating, but field primatology and getting up at 4 a.m. and going out in the dark forest was not for me.
Not a lifetime of that.
No, it was not for me. My friends in primatology know that it was not for me. But it just kind of planted the seed of this relationship. But at the same time, I was taking all of these anatomy courses. At this point, I was teaching anatomy as a graduate student, and I just was struggling. Like, how do I put these things together? And I sort of stumbled across reading about reproductive biology in the marmoset monkey, who I'll be introducing you guys to. And I worked with this wonderful woman. I just told her, I don't know what I want to do for my dissertation, but what I'm reading about the monkeys you work with is really fascinating to me. And she said, well, come on down to San Antonio, where the monkeys are, and see, if something strikes your fancy. And so first or second day I was there, she's giving me a tour of the lab facility, and she opens a cabinet and says that this is where we keep the placentas. And it was a light bulb moment for me, because it was moms and babies, but it was also an anatomical, physiological connection between the two. And I just knew that relationship was central to who we become as individuals, and central to sort of evolutionary processes.
Well, that's a fascinating story.
And then I ended up in College of Nursing.
Well, that's lucky for us, really. But that's a fascinating story on so many levels, because it says that it takes time for ideas to come together.
Absolutely. It's what I tell my own students when they're struggling, that the different forces have to come together in unexpected ways.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also unexpected people that you meet. And going to Nicaragua in the jungle, an unexpected location.
Yeah, and I went back to Nicaragua and then Costa Rica later as an instructor. So I went from student to instructor, kind of all the way, while knowing that wasn't where I was going to end up, but the opportunity to see and interact with wild primates was, I think, it's very different from where I am now, but I see the living relationships in what I do, even when I'm looking through a microscope. So I think it's given me a very broad perspective. Yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit about what you think really made that all come together. I mean, you saw those monkeys. Did they sort of on a Zen level call out to you, or did it just all sort of fall into place? Do you have that moment when it sort of said that aha moment?
Well, I mean, the novelty of thinking about the placenta, which is just this kind of bizarre, very much overlooked organ, was really...
And you have to tell some of our guests what the placenta is. Not everybody's going to know what a placenta is.
That's right. And I think that's one of the pictures I edited out. But so I can say now, so the placenta is this organ that derives from the fertilized egg. So very early on in development, you have the fertilized egg. Many cell divisions later, you have something called a blastocyst. And a blastocyst is just this hollow ball of cells, and then stuck on the inside of it, like a wad of chewing gum, is this inner cell mass. The inner cell mass becomes the embryo, becomes us.
Right.
And then the outer cell mass, the ball itself, becomes the placenta. So really, the placenta is us. We are the placenta. And then the placenta interacts with the mother's body to do all the things it needs to do. But it really kind of belongs to the fetus. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. They think of it as something that the mother's body makes on its own, but it really is from embryonic tissue. And so I think it was that it's very much a relationship. It's a physiological relationship, a molecular relationship, but there was something about that anatomical intimacy that really reflected for me the behavioral intimacy between a mother and infant. And so it was the parallel of the relationship that just struck me very deeply. And then it turned into an opportunity to ask many different questions spinning from that relationship.
That's wonderful to even think about what that moment was, to really see that association, because the placenta after birth, it is considered an after birth product, is usually disposed of. I mean, it's one of those things after the baby is born and the baby is cleaned up and given to the mother. That is usually put somewhere and then disposed of, along with some of the other, like the things that have been used in any kind of surgical procedure, etc. So tell us about those that are saved and what they're saved for, and how you're using that saved product.
Yeah, well, so I work in a couple of different contexts. I work with monkeys, as I mentioned before, and we have some more leeway in saving the placentas from those births. In the clinical context, standard, the placenta doesn't really fit into sort of standard of care unless something has gone wrong, and then it's saved for pathology just to make sure, see what's going wrong with the placenta. But typically that is just thrown away.
Right.
So that's an interesting part of the research process to, work with the patients who are part of the study to keep the placenta. And I had a project in the Philippines where some of the mothers in our study did want to keep the placenta, but for the most part, they were willing to let us have it because it was just going to be discarded. But when we have them, we do a lot of very kind of old-fashioned kinds of things. We weigh them. We measure their volume just by doing fluid displacement. We just put it in a really big graduated cylinder and get the volume measurement, and then we take samples so we can look at them under the microscope. And I can tell you what some of the things are that we look at. Or
That's right. I mean, here we're going from something that, again, if it's not used in most cases, it's out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. But in Julia Rutherford's case, it's right in front of her mind. And so she wants to tell you what she's getting from really studying this and how it's going to influence the health of mothers and the children and even subsequent children from some of the things that she's really looking at. So tell us about that. Tell us how it's informing, your science is informing us.
Well, one of the things that we've really developed a great appreciation for over the last 30 years is that the experience that a fetus has in the womb kind of stays with that individual into their life. That experience shapes the development of their organ systems throughout the body, the brain, the stress pathways, the kidneys, the heart. Everything is formed in utero as a function of the nutrition it's getting from the placenta and its mother. So we've really developed an understanding that developmental life follows individuals through their own, not just their own childhood, but into their adolescence and their adulthood. One of the things that I am most interested in is how does the placenta kind of direct nutrients from the mother's body into the fetus's body. There are many ways to address that question at the molecular structural level. What we do in our lab is we take sections of the placenta, put them under the microscope, and then we can actually measure at that microscopic level the surface area of the placenta. Placenta looks like a great big sponge. It has tons of little pockets and canals, and it's this highly folded tissue under the microscope with lots of surface area for oxygen, glucose. And so one of the things that you can use knowing that is get an estimate of how nutrients are passing, how efficient the placentas are at the microscopic level, and how that relates to things like birth weight, perinatal mortality, growth rates during childhood. And so we kind of are working at this very granular microscopic level, but within this dynamic system that is connecting maternal health to fetal outcomes or baby's outcomes.
So when you're looking at this sponge-like material and you're figuring out, okay, when you really add up all those little nooks and crannies, it has this like larger surface area. Is it where one placenta that has a larger surface area is going to transport more nutrients than, say, a smaller placenta that has less surface area?
Yes. So there are a lot of physical properties. One is this measure of surface area. There's more surface area, so there's more potential capacity, ability for materials to get across the circulation from the mother to the fetus. There are other considerations, so it can get sort of complicated, as all science does. Once you start asking questions, there are more questions you have to ask. But one of those is the thickness of that surface area. You know, how thick is that membrane across which different nutrients are going to pass or waste materials are going to pass. So that's another thing that we measure. So For an example, the model system I work with, the animal that I study is the marmoset monkey. And I do have a picture. I'm going to pull up a slide
Sure.
really quick.
Okay, we're going to show you this darling monkey.
I have to go, let's see.
We're going to flip around a little bit.
You're going to see a few slides go across your screen. This is just what I was saying about birth outcomes and long-term health.
Well, you're looking for the monkey. So the health of the placenta really would start with the health of the mother.
Absolutely. So I'll come back to that in a second. So, okay, that's my daughter. She's not a monkey.
But so cute.
But, one of the reasons we use animals as models is that we can ask questions that are difficult to answer in humans. And we study primates, monkeys in my case, because they're evolutionary linked, have similar kind of life stages and patterns and similar reproductive physiology. So I work with that guy on the lower right of the screen. That's an infant marmoset monkey. And they're fascinating because they mature very quickly. So about a year and a half, you have a fully adult monkey. And they have fast generation times. So if I'm interested in how things are changing from generation to generation to generation, with humans, that can take a very long time. With the marmosets, it happens pretty quickly. And then we get varying litter sizes. So here are so many different varieties of marmosets and tamarins, and you can see in all these pictures, they're coming here in pairs. We see twins quite a bit, but actually we see triplets very often in our colony. So, and the triplets have poor outcomes. They're born often at lower birth weights. They have higher perinatal mortality. And then in adulthood, we've noticed some differences in their metabolic health, more obesity, for example. So we have very different starting points from these monkeys. So I spent my dissertation work looking at the differences in the placentas. And their placentas were very, very different.
Right. So using these monkeys, which have babies very quickly after a year and a half old, they can start reproducing. You're then looking at their placentas and being able to see some of the trends that then can transfer to humans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go back.
Okay. So in terms of the implications for motherhood, right off the bat, it really means that you have to take care of yourself even before you're having a child.
Absolutely.
Before you even conceive a child. So your nutrition and just your general health is really going to have a lot to do with those early stages.
Absolutely. I mean, there is more and more evidence to suggest that health prior to conception, psychosocial health, nutritional health, are very important aspects of preparing the womb for a successful pregnancy. And the goal here, the larger goal of this work and that kind of intervention is to understand that pregnancy is certainly a time where we're focused on the health of the mother, and we're certainly focused on the health of the baby. But it's also recognizing that baby, if all things go well, will grow into an adult themselves. And so that health and the enormous burden of healthcare that we face with a lot of chronic diseases that emerge in adulthood, but we're starting to see earlier and earlier and earlier, like diabetes, like obesity. They're emerging earlier and earlier, but they have very early roots. So we do absolutely want to support maternal health for the long term.
Right. So I think one way of taking a look at that is, there's a lot of obesity in childhood, and maybe it really isn't just their eating patterns. That certainly could be a contributing factor. Not enough exercise. We know that children nowadays don't get as much exercise as they used to because they're always in front of screens, etc. But it may actually also be related to the health of the mother and that intrauterine experience as the baby is just in the very early stages of development. So I think that's very empowering knowledge because one cannot underestimate the importance of all that prenatal care. A lot of people don't go for it, because they think that maybe they don't have access to it, that's a problem. Or maybe they think they've had a child and so they already sort of know what the drill is, they don't have to bother. But it really doesn't matter if you had one child or you had a dozen. I mean, you really need to have that early intervention. It is so critically important to have all of those markers of your health being monitored, and then you being a participant in that, because that really will have a lot to do with the health of your newborn.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is a really big striking takeaway from some of the work we've done so far is these monkeys have very different reproductive pregnancy outcomes when they're adults based on this very early experience, this intrauterine experience when they were in the womb as fetuses, depending on what experience they had. If they had a nutritionally deprived sort of fetal period versus a nutritionally plush intrauterine experience, those that were deprived go on to adulthood to have 3 times the number of stillbirths as the kind of normal nutritional background. And that's huge because stillbirth is a tremendous problem. It's tremendously emotionally damaging. And in some parts of the world, the rates are just extraordinarily high. And we don't know what all the causes are. And sometimes if you treat just the known causes, it still doesn't prevent, it still doesn't predict all the stillbirths we see. Right. So what we're hoping with our work is that a better understanding of these historical factors, these developmental factors that women experience, social factors that women experience across their life course that informs each pregnancy, will actually contribute to a more tailored form of prenatal care.
Right. That is a beautiful thing. The drama of pregnancy. We can understand that at a much different level now that we've had this discussion, because it's not just a day-to-day change in one's body, but it is this unbelievable interaction that's going on inside and how this child is developing. I think that using the monkey models, I mean, they're all cute and everything, but they really do make a tremendous contribution to our science, so that we can learn and see much quicker in that so-called model than we can with humans, but we can transfer that information to humans. In the next few minutes, take us to what you would say you see your science really making as a contribution.
I'm in the unique position, I think, of having that anthropological background and having that training is, traverses cultures, traverses time spans, and so it is a very broad way of looking at humanity. At the same time, I have this very focused biomedical path, but those two really come together, and so I'm really excited about being sort of a representative of what we call evolutionary medicine, where a better understanding of kind of big picture biological processes and our evolutionary past and evolutionary relationships can shape biomedical research. What I'm ultimately hoping that we can do is better understand the mechanisms at different developmental time points in an individual's life that contribute to risk of whether it's pregnancy loss or other reproductive dysfunction, so that we can in a more nuanced way, in a more targeted way, and at a much earlier point in time, provide corrective interventions.
Right. I think that's great. I want to thank Julianne Rutherford, Dr. Rutherford, for sharing this with us today. And we are so delighted to have her as a member of the nursing community at U.I.C. College of Nursing. She is in the department where she works with many nurses, many midwives. Midwifery at the U.I.C. College of Nursing is known to be one of the most outstanding programs in the United States and in the world. And Julianne, working with her colleagues, is really helping to map this on a very different level. So as we tend to think of the products of pregnancy as been, really sort of like have the baby, Julianne is taking us way back in that process and helping us to have an appreciation for how we can really play a role in prevention, education, and hopefully making your life more productive. Thank you so much for being with us today. And remember, with health, all things are possible. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.